A very good morning from India and a warm welcome to this next joint webinar by Fintelekt Advisory Services and the Asian Bankers Association on the impact of ISO 20022 on AML screening effectiveness. I'm Arpita Bedekar from Fintelekt, and it's my pleasure to host this webinar today. At the outset, let me thank our friends at the Asian Bankers Association, especially Ernest, Amador, and Mig for their continued efforts and commitment to this webinar series, which is now about to complete 3 years. Today, our topic is ISO 20022, and to quote from the official website, ISO 20022 is a multi-part international standard by the ISO Technical Committee. Put very simply, it is a single standardization approach in terms of methodology, process, and repository to be used by all financial standards initiatives. I'm joined today on the webinar by two expert speakers, Sharad Nair, Senior Vice President and Principal Officer AML from Axis Bank in India, and Rohan Bania, Senior Business Solutions Consultant Accuity, who will be joining us from Singapore. Our third speaker, Arun Shankar from National Payments Corporation of India, had to unfortunately drop out last minute due to an emergency. But with Rohan and Sharad in the next 1 hour, we will discuss various issues pertaining to the implementation of ISO 20022, the technology challenges that are inevitable for the migration to the new standard, especially where there are legacy systems in play, and more importantly to the AML community, the impact on AML compliance processes and effectiveness, especially for AML screening. The way we will structure this webinar is to start with a presentation by Rohan Bania from Accuity, followed by a chat with Sharad. And in the end, we will take questions from the audience. So you can keep posting your questions along the way in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. With that, let me start by inviting Rohan to make his presentation. Rohan works as a senior business solutions consultant with Accuity in Singapore. He has over 6 years of rich consulting experience with the risk and compliance industry, where he has closely worked with some of the biggest financial institutions in Asia Pacific, Middle East, and Africa as they move to improve their regulatory compliance operations and policies. With that, let's have Rohan's presentation now.
Hi, everyone. Happy to speak here today. I'm Rohan Bania, a part of the business solutions team here at LexisNexis Risk Solutions. If you haven't heard about us already, LexisNexis Risk Solutions is a pioneer of data analytics. We help companies across different industries gain better insight so they can make better decisions to protect their customers, employees, as well as their shareholders. Today, let's talk about ISO 20022, what it is, and how it can help you better your AML screening as well. We're going to start off by talking a little bit about what ISO 20022 is, then look at certain timelines which would impact the industry as well. Then we're going to look at how we're expecting ISO 20022 to impact your payment screening. And last but not the least, spend some time around how the adoption journey for ISO 20022 can look like. So what is ISO 20022? Let's think about the last time you processed an electronic payment. Let's say you were processing a payment towards Amazon, or you were settling some accounts or some bills, or you were just sending some money across to your family. In the background of the whole payments processing, your requesting bank or your requesting financial institution would have sent out a message to the receiving financial institution stating the reason, the purpose, the amount, and your details as well as the receiving person's details. Now probably think about the last 5 electronic payments that you would have processed, again on the same grounds. There's an 80% chance that all of these payments were processed using different modes. The complexity and the beauty of this is that all of these different payment systems use different languages or essentially different formats in which these payments were processed. ISO 20022 will enable us to have a single standard format, which will help us exchange electronic messages between financial institutions. There are various reasons why it's important, but one of the primary reasons is that it will help us synchronize formats used between new systems, legacy systems, and enable us to process payments across different systems and markets as well. So what are some of the benefits and challenges that we can look at? To start off with, it's going to be an industry-wide effort, which means that almost all payment screenings or almost all payment systems are going to migrate towards ISO 20 or 22. Changing the format all in all from scratch is going to be essentially a very high implementation cost, which I'm guessing you would have thought about already. Not much different or not much far from your thought process would also be that every payment system which every financial institution is working with is slowly going to move towards ISO 20 or 22, which means there are going to be multiple timelines you have to monitor and multiple deadlines you have to meet as financial organizations as well. And then definitely there is the data truncation, which will occur during the coexistence period. And we'll talk about that in just a bit. While the coexistence period finishes and we all finally move towards ISO 20 or 22, there are a ton of benefits that we're all going to be part of it. Like we spoke just a while ago, it's going to have more structured data and a standardized manner of putting that data in, which will help us validate our payments better and also ensure that information is correct and complete, in turn leading to less number of rejected payments or lower payment costs as well. Also, it will promote interoperability between different systems, which means if your payment needs to hop more than one different payment system, it's going to be at a lower cost because now you don't need to convert one language to other or one format to other every time the payment's bouncing or jumping out. With all of this bundled in together, your payments will be much more optimized, and the benefit to screening efficiency is just the start of the game. Last but not least, the technical standard that ISO 20 or 22 is, it will help us adapt to new and emerging requirements in a very easy manner, which again means lower cost of financial institutions. In essence, what does this mean to every financial institution? It will increase transparency and compliance. ISO 20 or 22 messages can carry more detailed information than Swift MT or any other format. For example, ISO 20 or 22 will allow you to send or share information on each counterparty involved in the transaction. This is very important because of one of FATF's recommendations as well, that it's necessary to share all parties involved within the transaction. ISO 20 or 22 also is not just for your cross-border payments, it's also for domestic payments. As both systems now will use the same standard, it will help harmonize payment systems and ease the process of bouncing payments from one side to the other. Also, it will help facilitate information exchange. ISO 20 or 22 will replace all proprietary formats. If everyone's using the same language across financial industry, it will help facilitate communication across different financial institutions as well. Lastly, increase in efficiency. ISO 20 or 22 will allow you to have a single set of format instead of many. For your organization, it will simplify the creation of rules and processes based on the format of the message. In addition, this format is richer with better structure, which will increase your organization's efficiency as well. One of the key points to note is that the more financial institutions use ISO 20 or 22, the more benefit all of us will have. Now let's look at the timelines. Both cross-border and domestic payments will adopt ISO 20 or 22 at some point in time. However, we're expecting that at least 80% of high-value payments will be processed with ISO 20 or 22 within the next 3 years. If you've noticed or if you've not already had communications from your payments infrastructures, this is either already planned or underway across payment infrastructures globally. Swift, however, one of the key factors or the key migrations which are triggering towards ISO 20 or 22 currently will enable ISO 20 or 22 messages from the end of 2022. The full migration, however, is supposed to end by November 2025, which brings out the topic of coexistence. Also, by 2025, it's expected that all financial institutions will be able to receive and send ISO 20 or 22 messages. MT format, which is the current or the legacy Swift format, will be decommissioned. Now let's look at how it will look with the coexistence period. What you see on the screen currently is two different ways in which an empty message can be processed. Expect or say it's an incoming message and say it's the beneficiary information that is quoted here. It can either be in a structured format where you have three different lines quoting three different information. However, there's no clear bifurcation on what the information or what information is contained within each line. The second one is an unstructured format. The unstructured format would essentially have all the information bundled together in a free text field. During the coexistence period, you would have unstructured MX with or without a subline, which is essentially your current empty message being mapped into an MX message, but no clear bifurcation except for the name versus the address. However, post the coexistence period, we have much more structured information. We'll be able to differentiate between what the street details are, what the postal codes are, what the countries are, what the account details are, what identification numbers are, so on and so forth. I'm hoping you're already trying to draw the lines and understand how much of an impact this is going to be towards AML screening. So let's look at that. On the screen currently, I have an example of another empty message where you have the account number, you have the personnel details, and also some identification details coupled up with address details that the person has as well. Now, let's look at an ISO message, but in a structured format as well. You'll be able to differentiate what the street number or the building number is, and you'll be able to identify what their private identification is in comparison to the IBAN number relating to their account as well. Next, let's look at how an OFAC entity looks like. An OFAC entity, in a similar manner, is structured. It has different fields for different types of information. If you've not already drawn the line, let me help you draw them around. You'll now be able to map the name to be screened against the name and the name synonyms. The cities to be screened only against the cities, the countries to be screened only against the countries. You will, for example, know that 7 is the building number and not the part of an ID. This structure and richer information will be leveraged inside a transaction screening system. Let's look at some of the benefits that this can help in terms of payment screening. Firstly, you'll be able to screen with a lot more data control. One significant advantage of ISO 20 or 22 is the inherent extensibility that can accommodate more detailed information about all parties involved in the payment. The ability to add details and data points to the message not only provides greater transparency, but also enables screening solutions to raise more accurate and relevant alerts. In combination with richer data, the consistent structure of ISO 20 or 22 message makes it easier to share information, further supporting institutions, AML and sanction screening operations as well. It will increase the efficiency of your transaction screening by leveraging different structure in the data. For example, you'll be able to state that a field is a country field and you would want to screen it only against the country. We here at LexisNexis Risk Solutions already have clients using features of targeted matching. Targeted matching will help increase the relevancy of hits raised. We've also observed approximately 40% reduction in false positives just because of targeted matching. ISO 20 or 22 will also increase precision in terms of rules and reduce risks when you want to write these rules on your payment messages. For example, you'll be able to create rules on a specific entity available in ISO 20 or 22. In summary, you will now be able to screen with more efficiency, more relevancy, and eventually reduce false positives because of better screening rules as well. Let's look at how the adoption journey will look like. With any big change that comes into financial institutions or any other industry, some of the more important or some of the most important stakeholders are the people. We need to educate the people on what is the change that's going to come. We also need people to help manage the timelines, the deadlines, and the processes that are in place. We'll also need to put in more processes in place so that the migration is a smoother process to avoid more hiccups along the journey. And definitely with anything, there's technology and time that's needed as well. It'll start off by assessing your business and operational impact. You'll have to understand how your payments are going to be structured and how your operations is going to be affected. We recommend that you plan your projects, and while at it, you'll also need to build and train your teams, both technologically and operationally as well. One of the other key important factors is that you need to start talking to your vendors if you've not started that already. Your vendors would have different approaches, different screening solutions would again have a different look and feel towards how they want to approach the ISO 20 or 22 migration as well. Last but not least, it's very, very important and crucial that you keep monitoring updates that come from Swift. While there are not many changes that do come into place, there are definitely guidelines and updates that they share on what are the best practices that the industry is looking at. One way to identify if your vendor is already ready is to confirm if they've finished their Swift self-attestation that they've done. Swift is promoting test cases, and they also have self-attestation processes which can enable and identify and also help identify gaps which solutions can have with the migration towards ISO 2022. Do ensure that your vendors have finished this. If not, we recommend that you reach out to Swift and let them know about your vendors, and they can reach out to your vendors as well. That brings me to the end of my presentation. But if you've not known this already, I'd like to tell you that in January this year, LexisNexis Swiss Solutions and Accuity merged operations to create one of the largest global providers of financial crime compliance, fraud, identity, and payment solutions. Both the companies did previously belong to the Direct Group and still do as well. Our solutions currently help manage a variety of risks, including identity theft, fraud, money laundering, crime, terrorism, bad debts, as well as human trafficking. We have customers in more than 100 countries, and we do businesses with most of the Fortune 500 companies as well. I thank you for your time. Looking forward to speak to you soon.
Thank you, Rohan, for that presentation. I think that already explains many of the issues involved and benefits to institutions. At this point, let's get Sharad online. Sharad, can you activate your video and audio? Go there.
Yeah, morning, Arpita, and morning, afternoon, evening to all the participants on this webinar.
Welcome, Sharad. Sharad Nair is the Senior Vice President and Principal Officer of AML at Axis Bank, which is among India's largest private sector banks. Let me tell you a little bit more about Sharad. He has an experience of 27 years in various aspects of branch banking. He has held other portfolios, including heading credit and forex, heading learning and development, and he's currently leading the AML cell of Axis Bank. He has a successful track record of working in foreign banks and private sector banks in India and the Middle East. He has been with Axis Bank for the last 20 years. So India is among the countries that have had an early start to the adoption of the ISO 20022 implementation. And I'm sure we'll be able to take away some good learnings through this chat with Sharad. So let's get right into the discussion. Sharad, I understand that Axis Bank has already embarked on the process of ISO 20022 implementation. Is that right?
Yeah, so Arpita, there are two pieces to this. One is, like you had mentioned earlier about the domestic piece. Yes, from the RTGS segment, obviously it's more of a regulatory piece that is being done. And since most of the bank follow that, yes, we are there. But when we are looking at international payments or international payment messages, we are not there. We are yet to. I mean, there's a long way to go. So it's like we have started the process at Axis. And before I start, let me mention one statutory warning that I have to give, that all the whatever I say over here during the webinar are my personal views. They are not official views of Axis Bank and should not be construed as such. So coming back to where I was, so when we are talking about implementation of the ISO 2022, it is still some space away. What we have done is we have sort of got in touch with Swift, and Swift has sort of helped us in the first initial stages of implementation. And from the technical part, for a Swift implementation, we are there, we are ready. So if they say that tomorrow we need to implement this, we can. But Arpita, it's not just the Swift piece. So as mentioned by Rohan and as mentioned by you also, there are peripheral systems. So there are peripheral systems which feed into Swift. There are peripheral systems which actually consume data from Swift. And those are the systems that real effort has to be made, because what happens is in India, especially I'll speak from the Indian part, that in India, the regulator has made it mandatory that the Swift messages have to be created or have to be fed in by the core systems. So when I say core systems, every bank has its core systems where transactions data, customer data, profiling data, everything is there. And in India, it is regulated by RBI, who's the Indian regulator, that when you create a SWIFT message for outward remittances, this necessarily has to be created, or the data has to come from the core systems. So here, when we are talking about actually, to implementing the ISO standards or the XML format standards, is that I should be actually tweaking my core systems to feed in data in the format that Swift can consume and can, the message can go forward. So that is the challenge that I see currently. When I say challenge, it is not that it is not possible, but whenever there are issues like this, technical issues, it involves time, effort, money, and that is something that we are working upon. And on the other side, again, when we are talking about systems, we also have the core system consuming data from whatever inward messages that we create, downloading it and feeding it back into the core system to ensure that whatever is the data is consumed in the right manner. And in between, before we go there, we have the screening solution that is in place. Am I audible?
Yeah, I think your video is getting stuck a little bit, but you're audible now.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. Got a bad network. So
Nice.
what I was saying is, in between your core and your the Swift systems, it's your AML screening system, and that is another system that you need to invest in, so that the AML screening system actually consumes data in the format or as is sent across by Swift, so that effective AML screening can be done. Rohan gave a glimpse of that piece, wherein you were able to identify separate identifiers, separate variables that were given, and those have to be actually consumed by our screening software in the format that is being given, and obviously we have to work there too. So when we're saying have we implemented that, no, we haven't implemented that at Axis in India, but I see a lot of benefit that would come out of this for the segmentation of each message that come through, which will help primarily from my angle. When I look at it from the AML screening part, obviously it's going to add big value, because as of today, it is everything in one text box or in a couple of text box, which becomes very difficult to decipher whether, like Rohan mentioned, the 7 is a part of the address, or 7 is part of an account number, or 7 is part of a name. So, there are a lot of things, a lot of combinations that we need to work upon, which we can then slowly, in case the formats are stabilized, then the screening solutions also work much better, reducing false positives.
Right. You briefly mentioned, the impact on cost. So is there what is going to be the impact on cost, short term versus long term, and especially for, financial institutions where legacy systems are in use, how can they start thinking about modernization so that they, take the benefit of this new standard?
Cost is actually a big factor, Arpita. What happens is when you're talking about changing systems, and as far as I understand, most of the banks would be operating on large systems, which are well known across the country and the world. So what happens is any changes that take place in that, obviously there is a cost factor involved. Again, I come back to comparison. So when I say, is there a cost to Swift, putting this across and giving it to us? No, there's no cost, because obviously it's a format which Swift has made. It's more of a consumption from our end. And from the technical capability, again, I do not see much cost in consuming the data as it comes. However, like I mentioned, let's assume that I have to go back to my core system and I have to put cost there. So, and I'm talking only technical costs as of now. So when we are talking about the systems, it is like, obviously anything that you touch and go, you start with a purchase order to the end final billing that comes to you. And other than that, there is also a lot of time that you have to invest in this piece. So when I look at a change in a core system and an implementation of the new ISO standards, I am looking at a timeline of maybe a couple of years. I don't see that happening before that, because this is an entire. It's just not a patchwork. It is an entire streamline, an entire process which has to be changed. And I see, at least from the bank part, that it might take at least a couple of years to consume. And that is the technical part. Again, I would go back to part of what Rohan mentioned. You also have to invest in a good screening software, and if you already had that, then you need to sort of get them to give you the new patches for the changes that are coming in. Again, that involves a cost. Peripherally or additionally, you will have other costs, like Rohan had again mentioned. You have training costs. You need to actually tell the ground people what has changed, what has to be punched in, error free. You make a checker, ensure that both of them understand what is going through. So there is a training cost. Then there is a process cost. The process cost actually involves changing the entire process, the way that you used to do it till now. So how you used to code an empty message, how you used to send it, everything would change. And again, cost. So anything that you touch and go, you have something called as cost. And so training, process cost, you have the technical cost. So yes, it is an expensive proposition. And when you're talking about larger banks, let's say international foreign banks, they are already there, if I may so say, because they have their presence in multiple countries. A lot of regulators in a lot of countries have insisted on this, the XML format of consumption, and they already are there and they are doing it. For us, we are yet to reach there. So it is still some way off. But yes, costs are there, and obviously a cost is I would rather wouldn't call it a cost. I would call it an investment. The only reason being that when you talk cost, it is something that you sort of just pay and you forget it. But when you talk investment, it is like saying, like again, I'll give you an example of what Rohan mentioned, that when you see an OFAC format and when you see a Swift format in the current MT standards, you will see that they do not match. The data is there, but where is the data? So you really have to build in a lot of artificial intelligence, or try to do all the deciphering of cutting across the text and trying to decipher where the name ends and the address starts. But once you actually move into an XML format, which is a more user-friendly format in all sorts, so you are talking about, even reporting, even consumption, even moving into multiple systems, an XML format is a much easier format to create and consume. And that is something that Swift will bring in. So when I talk investment, I'm saying that yes, once that happens, then you will be in a better position to utilize your screening capabilities and try to eliminate the bad elements. So I think that is primarily the focus over here. And I think that should work well, because if everybody starts talking the same language, I think we'll be in a much better position.
Right, that makes sense. Yes. I'm hearing a lot about impact on, false positives, and the fact that in the short term, it's likely that false positives may go up because of all these changes, but are likely to reduce over the long run. Would you agree with that general opinion?
Yeah, I do agree. I do agree, because what happens, Arpita, like I mentioned, if you had a glimpse at the presentation that Rohan had mentioned, it is not English. So when you're actually typing in all those things, you need to structure it. There has to be a proper format in which it has to come in, and that format has to be in the standard that has been set in. So in case you do not do it in the format that is sent, I see those false positives coming in. So the false positives are not because of anything else. It could be because of those small changes that have been made, and if they are not made in the format the way it has to be done, which is where I brought in the people and the training aspect, the false positives might increase.
So there's
And
a learning curve, basically.
Yeah. And on the other part, when you're talking about, let's say, a consumption of your screening software. So if your screening software doesn't consume it the way it has to be done, which I doubt, because obviously there will be a UAT done and a lot of testing done, but still that that area is there in case it has not consumed it in the way it is to be consumed, and if it does not filter it the way it is supposed to be filtered, yes, you could end up with false positive. So it's more of a learning curve. I don't think, because since Swift has given you time to do it, and if institutions do not push it till the last moment of 2025 to sort of implement it, I think it should not be much of an issue. In fact, you can probably even run parallel systems of how you're doing today. So I'm slightly deviating, but Swift has given you the option of actually running parallel systems. So you can run an empty system, you can run an XML system together. Swift has also given you the option, or they have also given you a decoder, which will help you convert an empty to a XML and XML to an empty. Of course, on the way back, there would be some truncation because standards are different. And so just again, slightly deviating. So why I'm saying truncation is basically the XML messages are much more clearly defined. They are larger in size, variables clearly defined. And then when you try to put that into something of a smaller box, obviously something gets missed out. So normally XML to empties, they may not do, but empty to XML, yes, that provision is there. And when you move that piece, you can always test and do it. So what I was trying to say is, when you look at a change, when a gradual change is there, I think the false positives can be handled much better. So I think it's only a question of working on it. And in the long run, definitely I see false positives drastically reducing, because very simple example, a street name can be checked against a street name. It's as simple as that. So if you have that in the format, so in 3 places, 1 in obviously the negative list database, 2 in the Swift messages that come through, I think half your problem is solved. So I think false positives, yes, there will be a big change. There will be a good change for the good, I would say.
Right. Am I audible? I think I'm getting some echo. Audible, right?
Yes,
Yeah,
at least to me, yes. Yeah.
Yes, okay, sorry. So I was wondering, in your dealings with other banks or financial institutions in different parts of the world, either through correspondent banking relationships or just your industry interactions, what is your understanding of the level of acceptance of this new standard? Do you find financial institutions gearing up for the change? You were mentioning some of them are likely to leave it to the last minute to implement. What happens if they don't implement it?
Okay, so I'll take the first question first. So in my interaction, so I will talk domestically first with banks in India. I think we're all on the same page where we have started, but we are yet to be there. So it's like a WIP. So we are still working on it, but yes, start is good. And we have started the testing part of it. We have gone back to our core systems and trying to see how it can be implemented, what changes to be made, vendor associations, etc., have started. And again, like I mentioned, it will take time. Again, I'll go back to what I'd mentioned about international banks. So I think, as far as I understand and what I've heard, is that the foreign banks already have it. So foreign banks operate on 2 platforms. So they have the MT platform, they have the XML platform. And essential part about this particular thing is that when obviously the first part towards any Swift exchanges, you have to sign an RMA with the counterparty that you have, the correspondent bank that you have. And the foreign banks internationally have the provision of actually having an RMA, a provision of an RMA, both in MT as well as in XML. So they are willing to sign a format with you in terms of the old as well as the new. So as of today, I don't see a problem in this particular space. Large banks, large foreign banks have already implemented ISO, partly because They have multiple international presence. And like I mentioned, some regulators in some countries have made it mandatory with timelines. So they obviously have to meet those standards. And once those standards are met in a particular country, it's easy to replicate it across multiple countries they have their presence in. Having said that, the RMA is another area which we have to work upon. So when I told cost or processes, this is one big process. Again, we will have to work upon, because RMAs are something that are basic to any Swift messages, and any change in that, again, we will have to do an entirely different RMA with the same correspondent bank that we have. Your existing RMA will not work. So that's another effort. So having said that, we are in a world where you have large banks which have already done that. You have the smaller or the medium-sized banks which are trying to catch up. Is there an option not to do it? I don't think so. We have to do it. So it's like saying, is it okay if I don't do? And that brings me to the second part of the question. What if you're not there? What if you do not do? So here I'd like to give you a small example. So it's like buying a phone. Okay, so I would not want to quote any brand, but buy any phone. And the phone automatically gives you updates. So it gives you an update on year 1, update on year 2, update on year 3, and then it stops. It tells you, boss, buy a new phone. So because I'll stop giving you updates. So why did I give this example? I'm trying to put this example in parallel with Swift. Swift is giving you time till 2025. Swift says that I'll help you in whatever you want. I will handhold you, whatever provisions, whatever help you need on the website, online, we will help you. But get there, because if you do not get there, you might be one of the few banks who may not be at par with the other banks in the Swift community. And if you need to exchange um, a message, so as far as I know, I may be wrong, Rohan could be a better person to tell me. From what I understand is the MT 103s, 202s, 202 covers, 105 and 105 covers are the ones that have changed the ISO pattern. I think the series 7 has still been left out. That is the LC and BG part of it has been left out. But slowly you would see that the first updates that come through will be in the first set of commonly sent messages, the 103s and the 202s. And if you do not have that, and if you do not get the update, then I see a sort of a lack of the data that would go through may not be very clear. The counterparty, the correspondent bank may not accept your messages in the format that could be gone. Your messages could get truncated, etc., etc. So why risk it? It's as simple as that. So do you have to invest in it? Yes. How much do you invest in it? Like I mentioned, Swift does not charge you for the thing, but how much do you invest in a good screening software? How much do you invest in change in your existing core banking system is something that you will have to look at. But I don't see an option of not being there. It's like saying that you might just lose the race. You might just be behind that. And let me be clear that I'm not promoting anything, but it is just saying that if you're not part of the entire regulatory framework, then of course, if in India the regulator comes down heavily stating everyone has to be there, we would be there. But looking at the other countries and the other regulators, you might have to see whether you want to go there and how fast you want to go. In my opinion, the best would be by the 2025 timeline that have been mentioned. If you are there, you would be good.
Great. One last question before we move on to audience questions. As an AML compliance professional, how should you be involved in the overall implementation process in the organization? And this is, advice to other AML compliance professionals.
No, so from the AML, see, if I'm going to look at a niche area and I'm going to focus only on AML, then I look at only at the screening solution part. So when I'm talking about screening solution, you could have a pre-facto, post-facto screening like we have in our bank for both outward and inward messages that go through, payment messages that go through. You have to invest in a good software and ensure that the software is updated to consume this data in the format that has been given. AML screening is very important. Most of us would want to sort of cut. And when I'm saying most of us, I'm not talking about the AML community or the compliance community. I'm talking about an organization. The organization might feel, why do you want to invest so much of money into a small change? Let's quickly do some patchwork and close it. But let me assure you that from the AML piece, this is very important. Like I mentioned, if I am able to even catch one bad element of the hundreds and thousands or millions of transactions that go through, that's a big achievement, because obviously it has its ramifications. You have other risk of, the reputational risk, the financial risk, penalties being levied. I would rather put that money into actually implementing stronger systems to ensure that this thing is, done on time and your regulatory framework is not affected. So from an AML piece, it's more from the post piece that I'm looking at from our end, and the pre piece, which currently in the bank is built up at the operational level, where the trade operations actually do the piece. We have a screening solution there too, implementation there too. So in both these places, I see a lot of effort that needs to be done to ensure that this thing works well.
Right. Very interesting. I think that's all we have time for. We've taken quite a few questions from the audience, and I think this has been a very, very enlightening discussion. And we have Sharad and Rohan to thank for it. Thank you so much. It has been an absolute pleasure speaking with the two of you. Thanks for joining. And thanks also to all the participants for attending today's webinar, for all the questions, for making this session so interactive. Just one note, you can register free on fintelekt.academy, our online learning platform and repository of more than 200 learning videos in AML CFT. A recording of this webinar will be available on Fintelekt Academy. That's fintelekt.academy for you. And if you are a premium member, you can also get a certificate for participating in this webinar. That said, Diwali is right around the corner. So I wish everyone a very happy festive season for all those who celebrate, of course. Stay safe, take care. And until we all meet again, it's goodbye from the Fintelekt team.